Hello everybody, welcome back. This is episode 9 of the Glentendo podcast. I'm Glentendo. This is where we have galaxy brain conversations on all things Nintendo and the Smash community. And welcome back to another episode, another week. We got some news. Nothing too huge happened this week, but we have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about regardless. And real quick, we have a new super friendo to welcome. If you become a super friendo on Patreon, you get a quick shout out on the podcast in addition to getting the show 3 days before everybody else. Comes out every Friday for patrons. And we'd like to welcome Angel. He wants to be referred to simply as Angel, no at, no nothing, just simply Angel. And his message to the world is to declare himself, quote, the owner of Nubs. There you go. You got your shout out. You are the proud owner of various Nubs, apparently, according to you. So that's that. Thank you. But thank you very much, honestly. Anyone who chooses to support the show at any level, thank you very much. Really, really, really appreciate it. This stuff is always a little bit, I don't know, when you get into the podcast game, right? I thought, you just record yourself. There's not a lot of production that goes into it. I guess because there's no visual element, I just assumed that it would be a lot cheaper and easier. And it's definitely not super, super expensive, right? But it does take up a lot of time, and there are things you got to pay for here and there. So thanks to everyone who, it really means a lot to me that a few people have gone on Patreon and decided to officially endorse and support me as a person making podcasts. I'm very, very humbled. Thank you very much. So what have I been playing? That's how every show starts. Little icebreaker, ease in. What am I playing? I think if you want to be really good at Smash, I highly recommend that you put more time and effort into doubles and not just singles, because your awareness, it just raises your awareness because there's so much more going on, and you really have to be good at pressing advantage. And it's just, I feel like I'm better now at singles. I've just been learning so much, and I've just been analyzing my play a lot. And I kind of have privilege of like getting to play with some of the best players in the world just from being friends with them. And so they've been teaching me a lot and showing me where I have some holes in my gameplay. I think the biggest thing that I learned was how I really just needed to mix up my timing for anything that you do in Smash. I think like the biggest lesson I've had to, it's like something I've kind of known, but it's been hard for me to implement, is there's so much counterplay to Smash and to every move that you really need to keep your opponent guessing. Because, for example, I play Cloud, right? Cloud's grab is not great. And to make up for that, he has these very large, fast moves that are very safe on block generally. Like if you space back air properly, if you space forward air properly, you're most likely, you're never going to get punished if you space back air properly. And fair, his forward air, it's very hard to punish that when it's spaced properly. It's like maybe one or two characters that have something they can do about it. I think even that move is probably safe 100% of the time too. So when you have something like that, right, it means that your opponent, the answer for your opponent is just to shield. Because like I said, I'm not going to really, it's going to be hard for me to grab that person. And so they can just shield, and that kind of answers all of my moves. So then it becomes this thing of, I need to keep you guessing because the answer is obvious. And now I just need to, my job, if I want to land one of these hits, is to mix up my timing so that you didn't bring up your shield in time, or you thought I was going to do something else and you moved into my move, or you jumped or whatever. So that's a big thing that I'm really getting better at. Mixing up my timing and also just using movement to keep your opponent guessing. I'm just learning a lot about myself, like playing Smash and getting better at the game. It's funny because I actually don't have that big of a desire to play and compete in singles. but I'm just having so much fun for my own personal growth, just like learning how to be better at the game. It does kind of suck because we're in COVID, and so I can't really. I feel like I've gotten a lot better in the last 2 weeks alone, like by a significant amount. But I can't really measure that because I can't go to a tournament and see how I do and see how much better I got. And all the things I just mentioned, mixing up your timing, using movement to keep your opponent guessing as to where you're going, what you're trying to do. These are things that in a Wi-Fi tournament, it's very difficult for you to really fully implement those things. So right now, it just feels weird. I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm getting better, and I feel like I'm a little bit more passionate about the game, but I have nowhere to put that energy because tournaments are gone. So I don't know. Maybe I'll make more of an effort of having like COVID-free Smash fests and just seeing how I do in that environment. We actually have, while we're on the topic of Smash, real quick, we actually have a question from at TG Static on Twitter. And he says he's asking, are there skills learned in the Smash community that can be applied to regular life? So this is actually a really deep question. This is actually a really cool question because I think I've referenced earlier, I think in the last episode, how Smash changed my life. Going to tournaments and competing, it introduced me to this whole new wave and community of people and friends that I feel like I'm going to be friends with for the rest of my life, and people that I can't think of my life moving forward without. And even this podcast is we cover a lot of Nintendo stuff, and I don't want it to just be Smash, but it's coming from and out of the Smash community, and it's for you guys. You know what I mean? It's for the Smash community just as much, or if not more, than it's for other people. Which is why I love talking about Smash on every episode in some form. This question is something I think about a lot because one thing that I would say is that when you go to tournaments, right, you're going to lose a lot. Even the best players, you're going to lose a lot. It is very hard for you to win every tournament. And even the guys at the top of the mountain, no one is consistently first place. And even when you get first place, a lot of times people like MKLeo, who just has an absurd amount of first place wins at all the biggest tournaments in the world, there are a lot of those tournaments where he went to losers and went to the losers bracket and had to fight his way to the top after losing sets. The thing about Smash and competitive Smash, I should say, I think it'll teach you how to have a good relationship with losing, because losing is part of the process. And that's something that for me personally, I didn't even know I had a problem with that until I started competing. And it breaks you down as a person, right? Because once you start analyzing, when you start losing a lot, and then you start analyzing what you could have done better and how to improve, and you start talking to people who played you and they're giving you their opinion and stuff, you start to learn that the character that you are attracted to and your play style, very, very emblematic of your personality in general. And for me, how that manifested itself was that when I first entered the community, I was a Link player, right? And I was playing characters that just the way I used to play Link when I first entered the community was I would just spam a lot, run away, and throw stuff. And at that time in my life, I was a person who wanted to play it safe a lot and was very risk averse to a fault, right? So Smash actually helped me see that in myself because I would watch my own sets on YouTube, right? And go, oh man, I lost to this person. Let me go look at the match and try to see what I could have done better. And it's like, you're watching and you're analyzing, and then, I ask a friend of mine and they give me their advice. And it's like, yeah, you were just, you did not want to get your hands dirty in the set. And I'm just thinking, wow, that was exactly how I approach a lot of things in life. At that time, that's the problem I had with a lot of things in life. So now I'm like the complete opposite. And I give so much of that credit to competing in Smash and the people who helped me get better. And me watching some of those old sets, I look at myself, I'm like, that looks like a different person playing the game. So I think a lot of people look at this game or any game in general and they think it's just a game. People are going, they're pressing buttons, they're playing. But when you really break it down, if you want to get philosophical about it and you want to analyze it, how you play Smash, what character you choose and how you choose to use that character and the things that you're good at, your strengths and weaknesses, it says a lot about you. It really, really, really does. I gave my version of that just now. I described that, but I can talk about a lot of friends of mine who had a very similar kind of a very similar analysis of themselves. So I would say that keep competing and learning, because you're not just learning how to be good at Smash. You're learning about yourself. And if you keep pushing, you find out more. It's not about winning. It's about learning more. So that's my answer to that question. Great question. Moving on, we have a question from @loosegrip_ on Twitter. And he's giving me a choice here. He says he wants to hear me talk about either my love of Gorons or my least favorite Mario 64 level/star. So this is another thing I want to talk about because it's very fresh in my mind. I'm going to choose, I think I've talked about Gorons enough on the previous episodes where we talked about like the champions possibly being in Smash and all that. And I'm sure there'll be more opportunities to talk about how awesome Gorons are in the future. So I'm going to talk about real quick. I've also been playing Mario 64 still. I'm actually finally at the very, very end. I've just been doing so much work that I haven't finished that game as fast as I thought I was. I 100% every level before I move on. So now I'm at the end of the game. The only level I need to get all the stars in is the tick-tock clock. I've done everything else. And to answer his question, my least favorite Mario 64 level/star, it has to be Tiny Huge Island. I can't believe I forgot this level because I don't remember when I was younger. Maybe my standards for video games were lower at the time, but when I first played Mario 64 and when I revisited it later, I didn't remember that level being so bad. But it's really bad. Like, as revolutionary and incredible and amazing as Mario 64 is, right? It was the first game to get 3D platforming right and the first mascot platformer to get 3D platformers right. But that one level feels like what the other guys were doing. It's an interesting concept, I guess, but in execution, it just falls apart. And all the criticisms that I think people have of that game are almost just fully manifested in that one level. Like, everything comes together. All the recessive genes of Mario 64 are in full display in that one level. Like, the camera to me is actually brilliant. I think a lot of people complain about Mario 64's camera because when you finally do need to move it, it doesn't let you put it where you want to put it. But you're ignoring the fact that a lot of the levels, I would say the majority of that game, you don't need to move the camera at all. And it goes where it needs to go the whole time. And it just lets you focus on moving the character, right? We've kind of all accepted in modern games that you're doing two characters at once. You're moving your character on screen and then you're moving the camera, which I personally don't like at all. But Mario 64 got that right. And the one level where people really have like all their camera complaints actually make sense to me is that Tiny Huge Island. Man, that stage, I was just falling off for no reason. Like, there's wind out of nowhere. You can't see things. There's so many times where like the view is obscured completely and I had to switch to that zoomed in, like behind Mario's back view and then go out again. That level's, I didn't like it. I think that level's it's like the Sonic team designed that one level. Everything else is great. Mario 64, still a masterpiece. Masterpieces don't have to be perfect, but it's still a masterpiece. But damn, I was just surprised at how much I'm surprised I forgot how bad that level is, man. But yeah, gonna finish that game probably by the next episode. So you probably won't have to hear about Mario 64 too much in the future if anybody's tired of hearing us talk about Mario 64. But thank you loose grip for the question. I know he's a fan of the show, so I appreciate it. And we'll jump into some quick news. This week, they announced that Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon, and the Blade of Light arrives on Switch December 4th. For people who don't know, this is the first Fire Emblem game from the NES. This series, it's kind of become more popular recently, right? Like in the last 10 years, but it is an NES era Nintendo franchise. The series is 30 years old, man. And even though this game is called Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, that's a retroactive name change thing. This is kind of similar to like the way that people who are familiar with Final Fantasy know that Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 here in America are actually Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6 from Japan, because the first three games didn't come to America, so they acted like the fourth game was the first one when it came here. And so the naming conventions are all messed up. So now we have this kind of similar situation where the first ever Fire Emblem game is not called Fire Emblem anymore. It's now called Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. And the game in the series that is called simply Fire Emblem is the first game to come to America on the Game Boy Advance. So now we have this weird thing, but I explained it, so you're good. We're good. Let's move on. The game is going to come out on the Nintendo eShop for $5.99, while there's a limited edition that is coming out for $49.99. This collector's edition of the game will include a nostalgic, stylized physical NES box and a replica NES game pack art piece with a protective sleeve that transports owners to the era of the original game's release. The collector's edition also includes a colorful 222-page Legacy of Arcania deluxe hardbound art book and a game download code. It will be accompanied by an NES instruction manual newly localized from the original Famicom release, along with a fold-out world map and a mini Nintendo Power retro collectible. With this rich package packed with exclusive items, fans can finally play the original Fire Emblem game as it was intended, with power. All right, that was a mouthful from Nintendo. Thank you guys. So there's a few things to talk about with this game announcement. The first thing is that it is a limited release. This game will be available only to purchase until the end of the franchise's 30th anniversary on March 31st, 2021. Wow. Okay. So you can buy it this December. It will be available from December 4th to the end of March, so about 3-4 months. And I mean, my impression on this now is that, given that we just went through this with the Mario 3D collection and the Mario 35 on the Switch Online app, this is kind of just the new way that Nintendo's going to celebrate anniversaries, I suppose. So on next year, I can't wait to hear what they're going to do for Zelda and Metroid next year. If Metroid gets a limited 1-week release, it'd be lucky. All right, given the history of how we just don't celebrate Metroid at all. So that's the funny thing. Is like, imagine they come out next year. They're like, all right, we're celebrating Zelda, celebrating Metroid. It's going to be limited release. Metroid, you're lucky to even have that. But yeah, I think that when I see this limited release stuff, I think that what's happening now, I think it's starting to make sense to me a little bit, right? So, you know how in the past with like the 3DS and the Wii and the Wii U, if you bought, for example, the original Super Mario Brothers, that would not transfer to your 3DS or your Wii U, right? They had some like programs where you'd pay less if you bought it again and you linked your account. But for the most part, a lot of people just have to buy these games again and again on every single platform, right? And so now that we're moving forward with the technology and they have less of an excuse to not just have one account like they do with the Nintendo Online app, where you just have access to all these games all the time, it feels like their logic is, well, I mean, we're making a lot of money selling Mario Brothers every single platform. And so we can just keep finding ways of, if it's a limited release, then we can just do another limited release later, right? And so we can keep, now we found a way to just keep selling you the same game over and over again on different platforms with different packaging and all that stuff, because it's not a virtual console where it's available at all times. And therefore, if it's available at all times, it becomes a little harder, or at least they think it, maybe they think it would be a little harder to convince people, hey, buy this game again on our new virtual console. So I don't know. I mean, it feels like we're just going to be getting, here's a new way to buy this game over and over and over again. With this game, though, it is a little different, because this game is not a game that's available. It's never been localized ever until this point. So the original Fire Emblem has a bit of an interesting history, because, again, it was never officially localized. But what they did do was, subsequent entries in the series, I think 2 different occasions, they remade the first Fire Emblem game, right? And then added to it and called it a new game. So some of the other entries in the series, I actually don't have the exact one. It's the one that just recently came out on the SNES online app in Japan. But that game includes the entire first game plus a new game. And so they kind of did that a few times. So if you wanted to play the original first Fire Emblem in English, those games were your only option, were these remakes that they did. But now you have the original one, and it's localized. So it is special. It is kind of weird that this is a limited release for a couple months. I mean, they localized it. They went through the trouble of doing it. I'm wondering why. I'm wondering what they're going to do with it in the future. It's the same question we have for Mario 35 on the online app. Like, are they really just going to get rid of it? Like, I don't think they are. I think they're going to sell it. I think they're going to sell Mario 35 eventually. But then with this game, it's like, well, they're already selling it. So what are they going to do with it after? Did they just localize it to sell it for 3 months? Are they expecting this game to just sell 5 copies and then it's like, all right, we don't care? It is kind of puzzling for you to go through the trouble of localizing something and then make it available for 3 months. Some people are speculating that Mario, the 3D collection, they're going to start, the reason it's limited is because some analysts have speculated they're going to start selling Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy individually and not as part of a collection. That makes sense, sure. But then what are they going to do with this? This doesn't fit any of the theories or patterns of anything. I really don't know what to make of a limited release for Fire Emblem. Like, it makes a lot of sense for the collector's edition. Obviously, it's a collector's edition. Those things are limited just inherently by design. But a $6 eShop game is going to be taken off. You localized it just to put it on there for 3 months? I don't know. This is very strange, very bizarre. For a lot of people, this continues the narrative of Nintendo does bizarre things here and there. Every now and then, that bizarre thing is something amazing and revolutionary, like the Switch and the DS and the Wii and Mario 64. But then sometimes that weirdness is selling a $6 eShop game, localizing it to sell it for 3 months. So I don't know. Kind of interesting. I'm not going to buy this game personally because I've talked about Fire Emblem a lot on this podcast, but the quick version of it is I'm still not a huge fan of the series. I chose to jump in. According to the Fire Emblem experts, I chose the wrong game to jump in on. And so I don't want to make that mistake again with this one, because the experts are telling me that I should wait for the game called Fire Emblem, the first US one that I mentioned earlier from the Game Boy Advance, where I think the campaign surrounds Eliwood, the father of Roy. So I'm going to wait for that. If they bring that over, if there's some kind of Game Boy Advance online app, that'll be where I play Fire Emblem. But for now, that series, you know what? Get out of my face. I don't want anything to do with you until you put that Game Boy Advance one out. All right? Getting me kind of tight. The one other thing about this Fire Emblem announcement, though, that's pretty interesting is that, they localized it. So there's maybe some hope for Mother 3 or maybe some other games that haven't been localized. But Mother 3, I think, has a unique issue where it's not just a localization problem with that game. I think some people have mentioned that that game, it uses a lot of, they would have to replace certain assets like music and art that they didn't actually have the rights to or something of that sort. If anybody knows the details, the comprehensive Mother 3 or just Earthbound series in general, why it hasn't been localized and brought over here, if anyone has like the real details, I'm sure those Mother nerds out there know. Hit me up on Twitter, something, let me know. I'm actually just interested in that, even though that's another game that I have no interest in. I tried playing the original one on the Wii U. They ported it over. They localized that. They brought it over, and I thought that game was buns. It's so funny because our Hungry is not here on this episode, but he fully agrees with me. We have the same exact opinion on the Earthbound series, where we like everything about it except the gameplay. So it's like, I love the aesthetic. I think it looks really cool. I think Ness and Lucas are well-designed characters. There's a very iconic look to that series. The music is cool. The setting looks cool. There's a lot of cool humor in those games. But when I play the actual game, I'm like, this is the worst RPG I've ever played in my life. I don't know why people love this series so much, man. It is so, the gameplay is just not there. I'm sorry, man. All right. I'm sorry that you don't have better taste in RPGs. Play Chrono Trigger, and then you could at me, bro. So moving on, the next piece of news, the Crown Tundra DLC came out for Pokemon Sword and Shield, and there was a huge update to the Pokemon Home app, which I'm a huge fan of. I have every Pokemon ever in my Pokemon Home app. All right. So when Pokemon Bank happened on the 3DS, I went nuts for that. And up until Sun and Moon, I have one of each Pokemon labeled in my little box. I'm a nerd for Pokemon, bro. Haven't jumped into the new game yet. Will eventually, but Pokemon Home, Pokemon Bank, awesome. So they updated that, and they also, with the Crown Tundra DLC, they also added over 200 Pokemon from previous games. So this is obviously them making up for the big uproar of when Pokemon Sword and Shield came out. It was announced that there was no national Pokédex, and that was now going to be the function of Pokemon Home, and that the game itself wasn't going to have every Pokemon. For the first time ever, the code for every single Pokemon was not going to be native to the game. So now they're trying to make up for that. They're adding a lot of these Pokemon back. We talked about it in a previous episode, how like you can catch every single legendary ever in this new DLC. So it's really cool. This is a really cool piece of DLC. It seems like they really added a lot to the game with this DLC. I'm already seeing people on Twitter who are like into competitive Pokemon, and they're all just like shivering because now the legendary, the mighty Landorus is playable again in the game. And that character, that Pokemon, has been broken in the competitive scene forever. Somebody just posted a zoomed in picture of his face, and the replies were like, "You're really going to post this without a trigger warning?" That character's face is just, that Pokemon's face just looks at you, and it's just, people are triggered, man. That guy used to run through your whole squad. He was so difficult to be in a competitive team. So that's the Pokemon news. And also we have an update to Smash, an emergency update. And we just got Steve, and Steve came with, a patch and all that stuff. And they had to do an emergency U-turn and fix a couple things that's with Steve. Without getting into too many details, you can look this up. All right. It's a little NSFW kind of, but they basically had to alter, the main thing that they had to change was Steve's victory screen. If you know Minecraft, you know that, one of the big things of the game is this, victory stake. And so one of his taunts is that he takes out a steak and he eats it, right? And that's something that's directly from the game, and it's a cool reference, whatever. So one of his victory screens when you win a game with Steve in Smash is that he would have his steak out. But the problem was that the camera it always does like it always moves around a little bit to make your character look really cool in the victory screen. And so the angle of the camera while he's holding the stake in his hand, it just creates a very compromising image, to say the least, where the stake appears to be a very different kind of meat altogether. And so they had to just emergency patch that out. Now he just doesn't have the stake in the victory screen. And they also fixed a couple other things. There were a couple glitches of people falling through stages depending on how they interacted with Steve's blocks and stuff. That character introduces a lot of new mechanics and stuff that, as we stated previously, Sakurai, the creator of the series, he had to go on record saying just adding Steve meant we had to update and change the code for every stage in the game. So, yeah, they made that change. This is actually the second time they've had to make a kind of an emergency change like this. When the game came out back in 2018, when the game first came out, people might remember Mr. Game & Watch in this game, they did something a little different with him. So Mr. Game & Watch has been in every Smash game except for the first one on the N64. Since Melee, he's been in every game, and this was the first time that they ever made his attacks direct copies of his animations from the old Game & Watch games, right? So he used to just be himself and do a move, and the move would be from the game. Like he'd take out a credit card, or he'd take out, the chair, or he'd take out the snapping turtle. But now some of those moves also change his appearance to match what they looked like in the original Game & Watch, where those moves are inspired from. And so one of the moves is an Indian chief, and it's his forward smash. He takes out like a stick that's on fire and hits you with it. And in the original version of Smash Ultimate, there was a feather that was coming out of the back of his head. And it was very clear that it's a reference to an Indian chief. If you go back and look up the specific Game & Watch that it is referencing, that's what it is. And so people found it offensive, as people do with a lot of things these days, and because it's directly portraying a minority group. And some people would say it's not a flattering thing. I guess those guys didn't know the Game & Watch was a top tier at the time. So, I don't know, maybe if you knew that, you'd be like, dude, this is very flattering. Very flattering. One of the best characters in the game, man. They're representing. No, but it is a stereotype. Or some people feel it is. So they removed that. Obviously, Nintendo is trying to not be controversial at all with any of this stuff. And whether you agree with them or not on it, right? Like I know some people who think, I actually know some Native American people who think like, we don't really care about that. Like, it's not a big deal. I also know some Native American people who do feel like they don't like that stereotype. And we see that right now in baseball, the Redskins have had to change their mascot and stuff like that. So regardless of whether you agree with it or not, or whichever side of the identity politics lines you fall on, I think it makes a lot of sense for Nintendo to be like, look, these are things that they're not core to our business. And so it doesn't make sense for us to even in the slightest be controversial with these kind of things. There's no reason for that. You know what I mean? Like it's not that hard for us to change the animation and just completely keep our brand and image out of those kind of conversations. Final little bit of news that we got in the last week and a half, they've been showing a lot on the Zelda _ Muso Twitter, which basically just the Hyrule Warriors Twitter. They've just been showing a lot of art and a lot of new screenshots and a lot of art for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. This is pretty much Nintendo's centerpiece game for this holiday season. And so they've been showing a lot about it. The game looks awesome. It still looks awesome. One of the things that's really making an impression on me now is just this game looks very, very story heavy. And, one of the recent trailers like introduced an all new character that's a villain. And there's a lot of mystery around that and the relationship between this character and the Yiga clan. So this is really cool. Like this feels like a big expansion and a very substantial game or addition to the Zelda universe. I think this is like, I think if you would have told anyone it's another Hyrule Warriors game again, like I don't think anyone would have expected it to be like this. This is cool. This is Nintendo's weirdness in probably the most positive, taking another very positive turn. Very excited for this game. We'll obviously be talking a lot more about it when it comes out. I'm gonna make sure that my schedule is clear so that I can play this the second it drops, and we can talk a lot about it on the show. And we actually have a question from Twitter regarding Hyrule Warriors from Nick Polizzi. He says, I'm interested in Hyrule Warriors, but would have liked it to have been a normal prequel to Breath of the Wild, akin to how Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time. And so that's a really good point. Like, the more that I see from this game, and the more they show in the trailers and how cinematic it is, and how the towns and stuff before the Calamity, like I'm recognizing a lot of houses and towns that are in areas that were just leveled to rubble in the original game. I feel the same way. Like, this would just be such a cool Breath of the Wild game to play and not a Hyrule Warriors game. But at the same time, you have to remember that we're getting a Breath of the Wild 2, right? That's happening, and it'll probably be out within a year. And this game doesn't need to exist in a way. You know what I mean? Like, I definitely see your point that if we could choose, we would definitely choose for it to just be its own full game. But it just feels like this is something that would never exist in any other form. There's no other way that we would have gotten this. And if we kind of like rewind the clock before this game was revealed and before Breath of the Wild 2 was revealed, if you had asked me, and I think most people would answer the same way, if you had asked everyone, would you rather have a prequel to Breath of the Wild or a sequel to Breath of the Wild? Most people would say, I want a sequel. I want to see things after. I don't want to go backwards in the story or in that universe. So we're getting the best version of this timeline, where we're getting the sequel that I think most people would prefer. And the prequel idea, it only exists in this form. And I think that's a better problem to have. But I definitely agree, like, in a perfect world, we could just get all three, right? Get a prequel that's a full Breath of the Wild game, and a sequel that's a full Breath of the Wild game. So good question. Thanks, Nick Polizzi. He's also a friendo on Patreon. So very much appreciated. And keep the cool questions and impressions coming. So the last thing we're going to talk about today is not really related to the news or anything that we talked about already, but I got a very good question from a friend on Twitter at MHG Malarson, at MHG_Malarson, and he's asking for my impressions on crunch in game development from a consumer's perspective. So this is such a good question that I just really wanted to take the time to talk about it, even though it wasn't really related to anything that happened this week specifically per se. But this has just been a big topic in the past couple of years in the entire industry, and a lot of concerns and a lot of debate over, developers and companies forcing their employees to crunch. So just to set the stage a little bit, if people don't know, crunch is just a term that refers to the weeks or months leading up to the deadline where a game needs to be finished, and people crunching in a lot of hours, and sometimes not having weekends, not having any days off, sometimes working 48 hours in a row, sometimes just taking their work home with them just so that these games can meet these deadlines. And this all kind of started, the reason why this has been a bit of a hot topic recently is because there are certain publications that have put out stories from people at Rockstar and people at Naughty Dog. Rockstar famous for making the Grand Theft Auto games and Red Dead games, a bunch of other games. Naughty Dog famous for making Uncharted and The Last of Us and stuff. And they've been sharing these stories about how insane some of the crunch was for their most recent releases. And in Rockstar's case, Red Dead Redemption 2 is just Like even at a glance, like that game is staggering. So it's a very very obvious that that game would have an insane amount of crunch just from how the sheer scale of the game and how beautiful it is, and like it's just a massive world. There's a lot going on there, and The Last of Us 2 is also just a very big, huge production. So this has been a thing that certain publications have really talked about. It's kind of become a more of a thing that everyone talks about now, and there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of different perspectives on this type of stuff. It's not clear how much of this is coming from within the industry and from the actual developers and workers at these studios, and how much of it is coming from the gaming press. But there seems to be a push to unionize so that people have better representation and have better rights when dealing with this stuff with their employers. But then you can look at it from the other perspective of, these are very high skilled positions, right? No one's working in the game industry just for a paycheck. These are people who are passionate about what they do, and these are people who get paid a lot of money. And crunch is just part of the process because it's very hard to deliver something that is very high quality and is this difficult to produce over many, many years and millions of dollars of development, and have it fit on a perfect little schedule and a timeline. And there are a lot of people who voluntarily want to work late every day or for a couple of weeks to get something as good as it can be. And some people think that introducing unions into that process will just make it the more bureaucracy, and it'll make it harder for people to take that freedom with their own work. And the argument is that possibly it will make the quality of the games worse, because there's just so much more that you have to consider and all this stuff. And I kind of understand, because if you got to think about it from the perspective of the companies and the studios as well. A lot of these studios, they they're doing their budget for the year, and they're thinking about how many employees they have and who needs to get paid and all this stuff, and what we need to buy and to keep the lights on. And they need a game. Sometimes they just need a game to be done by a certain time, right? Because it's like, hey, we only make 1 or 2 games every 2 or 3 years. And so we need some kind of revenue. We can't just go and delay a game for 2 years, to avoid crunch and not have any money coming in. Like, we might not have jobs for you guys, So I can see it from both perspectives, right? And at the end of the day, if I have to have a view on it, I think anyone who has a clear-cut view on this is an idiot. If you have a simple view on this, you're an idiot, because this is very complicated. This is like a very difficult philosophical thing that you need to consider. I think it's a case-by-case basis, because there are stories of people at Rockstar who crunched really hard to get these games done. And then those games go on to sell, 50 million copies, like astronomical, insane numbers that your tiny little peanut brain, we're just sitting here. We can't even count that high. Right. And a lot of these guys get, these big 6 or 7-figure bonuses, depending on how well the game does. That seems to be like a standard practice at a lot of studios. But at the same time, I'm also thinking about certain stories where people talk about their work conditions and just how the condition of the offices and studios, some of them were like under construction, and like pieces of the ceiling are falling apart as you're working and stuff. And so to me, I think the answer is very clear, that it's a case-by-case basis. I personally can't have a very defined position one way or the other, because I feel like if that's the nature of the business, and the employer is compensating you in a way that you feel is fair, hey, we're going to crunch at the end of, when we're 3 months away from a deadline, it's natural in this business for us to crunch, and we're going to give you, that time off once we're done, and we're going to compensate you, and we're going to take care of you and all that stuff. If that's the case, then there's not really a problem with it. The only problem becomes when people feel like they have no choice, possibly because there is the argument that you could go somewhere else. Well, it's not so easy, because if the crunch at your studio, if the managers at your studio are doing a poor job, and now the project is gonna experience an insanely large amount of crunch simply due to the mismanagement of the project, right? I can't simply just leave. It's not as simple as people make it seem. You can't just pick up, take your family, your house, your mortgage, all these things you may have invested, and go, hey, this isn't healthy for my family. I'm going to just go to another studio where I don't have to crunch. If it becomes an industry standard and people are just crunching left and right and there's nowhere for you to go, that's when it ends up being not such a simple answer. So again, it goes back to what I'm saying of like, you can't really have a very specific, I personally I don't see a very specific answer to this problem. It's interesting because if you go to, from a Nintendo perspective, it's interesting because Nintendo, they can afford to delay a game. They're famous for delaying games. Nintendo has so much revenue just in terms of the bank and also just coming in all the time that they aren't under the same pressure and stress of other companies and studios where they have to have games out by a certain time. There's definitely moments in their history where of course they do, and they definitely will in the future if they're trying to have, a new system come out and they need a game to launch with it and all that stuff. But by and large, people forget like Animal Crossing came out this year and it was, this mega huge hit, but it was supposed to come out in 2019. And the reason that was given for Animal Crossing's delay, the game was announced in 2018 as a 2019 game, and then it got delayed into 2020. And the reason that was given from Nintendo themselves was that they were trying to avoid crunch and maintain a healthy work-life balance for their employees. And, their stock took a huge hit. They lost a lot of support over just delaying Animal Crossing. Nintendo can uniquely do that. Like we can praise them, right? And say, look, Nintendo does it, right? Like they're setting a standard and they're setting a precedent for the industry to avoid crunch. They're valuing their employees and they definitely are, but it's not so simple for other companies to just simply delay their game the way that Nintendo did. Nintendo has so many other games coming out that they don't need Animal Crossing to come out in 2019. And clearly we're seeing that the proof of that in this holiday lineup where they don't really have a big game this holiday that is on the level of the other holidays. They're okay with just having, Hyrule Warriors, Pikmin 3, and like DLC and stuff. So I guess they're doing the right thing. But before we give them too much praise, let's also understand that, they're in a unique position where they can do that. And maybe we're seeing that shift in them is a newer thing because I actually don't remember exactly where I read this, but I'm 100% sure I did. There was an interview with Miyamoto, creator of Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong, all that. And at one point, I think they're on the topic of game development and how stressful it can be. And there were rumors that at some point Miyamoto had a cot in the office because they were so deep in a project that he couldn't go home, and that a lot of people had to do that, not just him. And I remember somewhere in this interview, he states that during Mario 64's development, he was working so hard that he has a heart condition to this day from the development of that game. And you got to think, like, keep that in context. That development team was 15 people. You know what I mean? Like now a AAA game, you can't even get a AAA game that's 20 people. It's like hundreds of people minimum. These things are very big, expensive things to make. And so for him to have that much stress back when it was a much smaller scope of a project, to the point where, the lead game designer in gaming history, he has a heart problem apparently to this day. I mean, maybe Nintendo's approach is kind of a reaction to that. Like maybe they're seeing their senior staff, the effects that the crunch of the early and the mid Nintendo years had on their body and where they are now, and thinking, all right, well, our new generation, we have to make sure we keep these guys healthy and keep our team as healthy as possible. And maybe the views on crunch are changing a lot. Again, I don't remember exactly where I saw that interview or read about that, but I'm certain that I did. I tried to find it for this episode so I could reference it properly, but it was in some dark corner of the internet, like some fan translated some obscure 1997 interview with Miyamoto something like that. So if anybody finds it, let me know. I couldn't find it preparing for this show. I couldn't find it, but it's definitely out there somewhere. I'm very confident I read that. So just hope nobody thinks I'm just making things up or spreading rumors about the great Lord, the Savior, Shigeru Miyamoto. But to go back to the center of this question, now that we kind of have a little more background on just crunch and that in general, the question that Malarson's asking is the consumer's perspective. Like, how should consumers look at this stuff, right? So given all the context I just gave you, it is a very complicated issue, right? And I'm not trying to have a fake, fair, like middle of the road argument where I'm like, oh, this is controversial, so I'm going to play the middle and not take a side. This is really hard to take a side on. This goes into like deep philosophical and political beliefs. And how should the consumer's perspective be on this? I think back to like the big controversies over Foxconn. For those who don't know, Foxconn is this Chinese manufacturer that manufactures all of Apple's products, all of Nintendo's products, all of Sony's products, all of Microsoft's products, and if not all of, most. Recently, they've actually extended their company to like Wisconsin and like a few other places in the world. So it's not all happening centered in China as it was in the past. But the reason why that's relevant is because there was a big controversy, I think back in 2012, where people noticed they were reporting how Foxconn had to put up nets around their building because so many of their workers were committing suicide from the insanely harsh work conditions. And we're also seeing that with Amazon today here in America. There's a lot of stories and reporting about how horrible the work conditions are and insane stories that I don't need to detail, but it does bring up this thing of, the consumer feeling like they don't want to support companies that create products under horrible conditions. This is a very difficult thing because that old argument of, well, if you don't like where you're working at, just go work somewhere that doesn't do things the way you don't like it. There's a limit to that. And when it comes to Foxconn, it's like these guys are in communist China. They don't have the same choices we have here to go work somewhere else. And there's so many economic questions that go into it. So I really don't know what the right answer is. I think it's a case-by-case basis. Nintendo clearly, when it comes to crunch, is seems to be doing the right thing, but they still make their products at Foxconn. So if you care about crunch and the game developer, maybe you should also apply that same consistency to the people who are actually putting the pieces and the parts together to all the switches and the hardware and all that stuff for all gaming platforms. And it kind of just comes down to this thing of, this deep philosophical way of looking at it where there's really no clean cut, like ethical choice that you can make in the world when it comes to buying a product. Because if you trace it far back enough, there's blood on somebody's hands, and people are sacrificing either their time, their body, their effort, blood, sweat, and tears. They're making sacrifices to create all these amazing things that we like. And the nature of the universe is that, energy transfers from one place to another. And so, your time on this earth, you choose to put your energy into what you put it into. And there are limits to that. And people want things to be better, and people want better choices. When it comes to the overall opinion on crunch, it really just comes down to like this case-by-case basis of like, when this company did it this way, it wasn't okay. And when this company did it this way, it was okay, or they did it in the right way. It's all about, the workers feeling like they have the best options. And yeah, it's a very tough issue. I'm very glad that somebody asked this question because it's just a really interesting topic. And I'm actually very interested to hear people's responses to this. That's the question. Thanks to Malarson. And with that, on that note, I must say farewell. That's the end of the episode 9, in, above, around the books. Thank you to everyone for listening. At me on Twitter, bro. My Smash Doubles IQ is Galaxy Brain now. I'm just growing in so many ways, bro. I'm growing and it's showing. I'm not just a grower. I'm also a shower. Thank you guys. See you next week. Hope you enjoy the show. You can follow me on Twitter at @SuperGlentendo. The Glentendo podcast is a weekly Nintendo/Smash community podcast. Our aim is to have galaxy brain conversations on all things Nintendo. If you like the show, please consider becoming a friendo and supporting at patreon.com/Glentendo. Friendos get early access to the show each Friday. The show then becomes available to all for free the following Monday on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts and Spotify right now and you like the show, give it a good review. It helps support a lot more than you might think. This show is brought to you by our amazing producers, Naomi, Eduardo, and the legendary Riz.